Carl Jung. Life begins when you find yourself, the journey to authentic existence. Imagine waking up one pivotal day, perhaps gradually over weeks or months, consumed by the profoundly unsettling realization that the life you have painstakingly constructed, the one you have been diligently living, is not truly authentically your own. That every significant decision you believe you've made, every core belief you fiercely hold, perhaps even the very desires that seem to relentlessly drive you forward, may not have organically originated from the deepest, most genuine part of who you truly are, but rather they may stem primarily from the pervasive, often invisible expectations, the deeply ingrained conditioning, and the myriad unseen influences of the complex world swirling around you. Pause for a moment. Think about it with unflinching honesty. How much of your current identity, the you that you present to the world, and perhaps even perceive internally, is a genuine reflection of your authentic self, your unique essence? And conversely, how much of it represents a meticulously, perhaps even unconsciously, carefully constructed mask? A persona skillfully shaped over years, perhaps decades, by relentless external pressures, familial, societal, cultural, professional. How often, if you dare to be truly honest, do you feel deep down like you are merely playing a role, dutifully reciting lines from a pre-written script? A script authored not by your own soul, but primarily by society, by your specific upbringing, or perhaps most insidiously, by the persistent limiting fears that constantly whisper insidious doubts in the shadowy background of your mind. Today, we embark on a profound exploration, a deep dive into one of Carl Jung's most challenging, yet ultimately profound insights. The radical idea that genuine life doesn't truly begin in the fullest psychological sense until you actively find yourself. But what does this enigmatic phrase truly mean? What does it entail psychologically and existentially to find yourself? Is it merely about achieving a superficial level of intellectual self-awareness, cataloging your likes and dislikes? Or does it point towards a far deeper, more arduous, ultimately transformative process at play within the human psyche? Stay with me on this journey, because as we begin collectively to uncover the often hidden powerful forces that unconsciously shape your perceived identity, you will likely come to see, perhaps with startling clarity, precisely why most people tragically never truly find themselves in this deeper sense, and more importantly, how you possess the inherent potential to break free from these limiting constraints. The final realization we will ultimately discuss possesses the most profound power of all. It holds the latent potential to shift not only the fundamental way you perceive yourself, but also the very way you consciously engage with the world around you. Carl Gustav Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, was far more than just a conventional theorist of the mind. He was a courageous explorer who ventured boldly beyond the established, often limited theories of his time, daring to map the vast, intricate, often bewildering hidden realms of the unconscious psyche. Unlike many psychologists, particularly in the earlier 20th century, Jung fundamentally did not believe that achieving psychological well-being or a meaningful life was simply a matter of passively adjusting oneself to fit neatly within prevailing societal norms. Instead, he viewed authentic psychological growth as an inherent lifelong journey toward what he termed individuation, the complex, often challenging, yet ultimately profoundly rewarding process of becoming one's most complete, authentic, integrated self. But here lies the stark, often uncomfortable reality. The vast majority of people likely never consciously undertake that profound journey. They remain often unknowingly psychologically trapped within a version of themselves, an identity that has been predominantly shaped by external influences rather than emerging organically from within. They passively live according to inherited beliefs and societal expectations, rarely, if ever, pausing long enough to genuinely question whether the life they diligently lead is truly aligned with who they authentically are at their core. They relentlessly seek validation and a sense of worth, primarily from the outside world, mistakenly believing that lasting happiness fundamentally comes from achieving external approval, societal success, or seamlessly fitting in with the perceived norms of the collective. Yet inevitably, deep down beneath the surface of outward conformity or apparent success, there often resides a quiet, persistent unrest, an unshakable, perhaps inexplicable sense that something fundamental is missing. Something vital remains unexpressed, unlived. Jung profoundly believed that true life finally begins precisely when we summon the courage to stop running frantically from ourselves, from the uncomfortable truths residing within our own depths. But before we can meaningfully talk about what it truly means to find yourself in this deeper Jungian sense, we must first rigorously understand what typically prevents most people from ever genuinely doing so. From the very moment we enter this world, vulnerable and dependent, we are immediately subjected to a powerful, pervasive process of conditioning. We are given names, assigned identities, slotted into predefined roles based on gender, family culture, socioeconomic status. We are systematically taught, both explicitly and implicitly, what is deemed acceptable behavior and what is not. What actions, thoughts, and feelings will be rewarded with approval and belonging, and which will be met with punishment, disapproval, or rejection. This intricate process of socialization is often so subtle, so gradual, woven so seamlessly into the fabric of our upbringing that we rarely consciously question its underlying assumptions or its impact on our developing psyche. We instinctively adapt, we unconsciously conform, and over time, often without realizing it, we learn to systematically suppress those vital parts of ourselves. Our authentic feelings, our unique perspectives, our unconventional desires that don't align neatly with the often narrow expectations placed upon us. Think back honestly to your own childhood. Were there specific moments when you perhaps expressed yourself freely, authentically, joyfully, only to be met with subtle or overt disapproval, perhaps even ridicule? Perhaps you were repeatedly told to be more realistic, to suppress your imaginative flights of fancy. Maybe you were admonished to stop being too sensitive, learning to equate emotional expression with weakness. Or perhaps you were implicitly taught that certain powerful emotions like anger or intense passion and certain authentic desires were somehow inherently inappropriate, shameful, or unacceptable to express openly. Slowly, often painfully, you likely learned to hide those vulnerable, authentic parts of yourself, to carefully tuck them away deep within the recesses of your psyche where you believed no one could see them, judge them, or reject them. And precisely in doing so, you unconsciously began the lifelong process of building a mask, what Jung famously called the persona. The persona represents the socially acceptable face we present to the world. It is the carefully curated version of ourselves designed to navigate social interactions, gain acceptance, and protect our more vulnerable core. It allows us to function effectively within society, to fulfill expected roles, to gain acceptance. But here lies the profound psychological problem. The more completely we unconsciously identify with this mask, the more we mistake the performance for our actual self, the more inevitably we lose touch with our real selves, our authentic core residing beneath the surface. We gradually begin to believe that we are the persona, tragically forgetting that there exists something infinitely deeper, truer, more essential beneath it. And then, complicating matters further, there exists the crucial other side of the coin, the shadow. If the persona represents everything we consciously choose to show the world, the shadow encompasses everything we unconsciously or consciously choose to hide from it, and often even more significantly hide from ourselves. It consists of everything we have actively rejected or suppressed within ourselves Throughout our lives, our deepest fears, our often unspoken and perhaps unacceptable desires, our perceived vulnerabilities, our judged character flaws, and crucially often, even our hidden strengths and untapped potentials that we were perhaps discouraged from owning or expressing. And here is where Jung's insights become even more profound and potentially unsettling. The shadow doesn't just passively disappear into oblivion simply because we refuse to consciously look at it. It doesn't vanish through sheer force of denial or repression. Instead, denied conscious acknowledgement and integration, it inevitably operates powerfully beneath the surface of our awareness, insidiously influencing our thoughts, subtly shaping our behaviors, and often dramatically fueling our seemingly irrational emotional reactions. The very parts of ourselves that we most vehemently reject or deny don't actually go away. They simply gain autonomous power in the unconscious, often manifesting in distorted, indirect, sometimes destructive ways. Frequently, this occurs through the psychological defense mechanism of projection. Have you ever found yourself feeling an intense, seemingly irrational dislike for someone, often without fully understanding the root cause of your aversion? Have you ever been consistently, disproportionately triggered by certain specific behaviors? In others, behaviors that seem to provoke an unusually strong emotional reaction within you? Jung profoundly believed that when we are significantly disturbed or intensely irritated by specific qualities in other people, it is often precisely because those very same qualities exist unrecognized and unintegrated within us, hidden deep within our own personal shadow. But what if, and here lies the transformative potential, what if I told you that within this very shadow, this repository of your disowned self, lies the essential key to unlocking true, profound self-discovery, that the very parts of yourself you have systematically suppressed, ignored, perhaps even hated, are not ultimately your enemies, but rather represent the crucial missing pieces required for achieving psychological wholeness. Jung's great central insight was precisely this: authentic psychological growth is not achieved by somehow magically eliminating the shadow by striving for an impossible, inhuman perfection. It is achieved rather through the courageous lifelong process of consciously integrating it. It requires deliberately, patiently looking into the often uncomfortable depths of your own unconscious and courageously facing what you have long denied or run away from. Because only when you consciously do that, Jung argued, do you finally unlock a profound, previously inaccessible source of genuine personal power, unwavering authenticity, and lasting psychological freedom. This marks the point where the real journey towards finding yourself truly begins. Are you genuinely ready to confront the often uncomfortable truth of who you really are beneath the masks and defenses? Are you willing to break free from the seductive, yet ultimately limiting illusions that have perhaps shaped your entire life thus far? Because what comes next, if you choose to continue this exploration, will likely challenge everything you thought you knew about yourself. And simultaneously, it possesses the profound potential to open the door to a life that is finally, authentically, unequivocally yours. Most people navigate through life operating under the fundamental, often unexamined belief that they already know who they are. They readily define themselves based on external markers, their given name, their professional job title, their cultural background, the accumulated narrative of their past experiences. But what if I proposed to you that this perceived identity is far more complex, far more layered, perhaps even far more illusory than you currently realize? That the self you consciously believe yourself to be is often just a surface-level construct, a mere fraction, a single facet of a much deeper, more profound, infinitely more mysterious reality residing within the depths of your psyche. Carl Jung profoundly believed that within every individual, regardless of their external circumstances, there exists a hidden inner world, a vast and intricate inner landscape. This internal realm is filled with often forgotten memories, powerfully suppressed emotions, persistently unacknowledged desires, and vast reservoirs of untapped potential. And the ultimate key to truly authentically finding yourself lies not primarily in attempting to meticulously construct a new, improved external identity, but rather in courageously embarking on the inner journey to uncover what has long been buried, hidden, neglected within you. Let's pause for a moment for deep reflection. Have you ever experienced, perhaps in quiet moments, a deep, often unexplainable longing for something fundamentally more? A persistent underlying sense that there exists a greater, more authentic version of yourself, patiently waiting, perhaps even yearning to emerge into conscious expression. Understand that this feeling is not likely just fleeting imagination or wishful thinking. It is very possibly the subtle yet insistent voice of your unconscious mind, the whisper of your deeper self, gently yet persistently calling you towards something greater, towards the path of wholeness. Jung referred to this inherent lifelong psychological process, this innate drive towards realizing one's full potential, as individuation. He firmly believed that true lasting fulfillment comes not primarily from passively conforming to external expectations or achieving societal markers of success, but rather from consciously striving to integrate all aspects of ourselves, the perceived good and the acknowledged bad, the conscious light and the unconscious dark, into a cohesive, functioning whole. But before we can effectively integrate these disparate parts, we must first possess the courage to consciously confront them. And this is precisely where most people stop short on the journey. Because honestly, facing yourself, particularly the hidden, shadowy aspects, is often profoundly uncomfortable. It inherently requires looking directly at aspects of your personality, your history, your motivations that you have likely spent a lifetime diligently ignoring or actively suppressing. It fundamentally demands that you rigorously question long-held beliefs that may have provided a sense of security or belonging. It necessitates that you consciously challenge your deepest fears, and it often requires courageously confronting the unresolved inner conflicts that have subtly yet powerfully shaped the entire trajectory of your life thus far. Think about it honestly. How often do we instinctively avoid genuine silence? How frequently do we automatically reach for distractions? Immersing ourselves in work endlessly, scrolling social media, passively consuming entertainment, engaging in almost anything that effectively keeps us from simply sitting alone with our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own inner landscape. This pervasive pattern of constant external distraction is often not accidental. It frequently functions as a powerful psychological defense mechanism, a subconscious strategy for effectively avoiding the deeper, potentially uncomfortable questions that inevitably linger just beneath the surface of our busy conscious minds. But here's the crucial point. No matter how diligently we try to avoid them, no matter how skillfully we distract ourselves, these hidden aspects of ourselves do not simply go away. They continue to exert their influence. They persistently show up in unexpected, often disruptive ways, perhaps manifesting as chronic anxiety, recurring patterns of self-sabotage, perpetually unfulfilling relationships, or that persistent gnawing feeling of being fundamentally lost, disconnected, directionless in life. Jung profoundly believed that our unconscious mind is always speaking to us constantly, sending messages, offering guidance, attempting to lead us towards greater wholeness. But most of us have effectively learned to ignore its subtle, often symbolic language. We prioritize the noise of the external world over the wisdom of our inner depths. However, if we consciously begin paying attention, cultivating mindful awareness, we inevitably start to see recurring patterns. We begin to notice how our deepest, often unhealed wounds unconsciously influence our present-day choices and reactions. We start recognizing how our suppressed desires subtly shape our behaviors and relationship dynamics, and we begin to understand how the very things we fear most often hold the greatest lessons, the most potent potential for growth and transformation. Let's consider a simple yet powerfully illustrative example: the pervasive fear of rejection. Many individuals navigate their lives fundamentally terrified of being judged, criticized, or abandoned by others. Consequently, they constantly seek external approval, diligently avoid conflict at all costs, and habitually suppress their true thoughts and feelings, simply to maintain a semblance of harmony and belonging. But where fundamentally does this deep-seated fear truly originate? Is it really just about the potentially hurtful opinions of others in the present moment? Or does it perhaps stem from something deeper, perhaps an old wound from childhood, an early experience of criticism or abandonment, a moment perhaps long forgotten consciously when they first internalized the painful feeling of being unseen, unheard, or fundamentally unworthy? Jung would argue that this pervasive fear is not merely a fleeting emotion. It represents a significant shadow aspect of the self, a vulnerable part that has not yet been fully acknowledged, understood, and integrated into the conscious personality. And until it is brought courageously into the light of awareness, it will inevitably continue to unconsciously control one's actions, decisions, and relationships from behind the scenes. But here lies the incredible transformative possibility. When we finally summon the courage to face these hidden, often fearful parts of ourselves, directly, compassionately, non-judgmentally, they paradoxically begin to lose their compulsive power over us. Imagine just for a moment what it might genuinely feel like to live your life fundamentally without the crippling fear of judgment, to confidently speak your authentic truth without paralyzing hesitation, to make significant life decisions based not primarily on what others expect of you, but solely on what deeply, authentically resonates within you. This represents the profound power of individuation. It is not ultimately about magically becoming someone entirely new, erasing your past. It is fundamentally about becoming more fully, more authentically who you truly already are beneath the layers of conditioning and fear. But how practically do we consciously begin this potentially daunting journey? How do we start effectively uncovering the powerful unconscious forces that subtly yet profoundly shape our lives? Jung believed that one of the most consistently powerful ways to access the unconscious is through paying close attention to the rich symbolic language of symbols, dreams, and dedicated introspection. He saw dreams, in particular, not as random neurological noise, but as direct messages originating from the deeper self, often revealing hidden truths, unresolved conflicts, and guiding insights about our psyche. He also strongly emphasized the critical importance of creative expression, whether through engaging in art, writing, music, dance, or other forms of imaginative self-exploration, as potent ways of accessing and actively integrating the often non-verbal symbolic contents of the unconscious mind. But perhaps the single most important first step is simply cultivating this conscious awareness, the very moment you begin genuinely to question your habitual thoughts, your automatic reactions, your deeply held yet perhaps unexamined beliefs. You are already taking the crucial first steps toward profound transformation. The moment you consciously choose to stop running from internal discomfort and instead begin courageously facing it with curiosity, seeking to understand its message rather than merely suppress it, you effectively begin the sacred process of reclaiming your true self. Because here lies the fundamental, perhaps tragic truth. Most people live their entire lives as virtual strangers to themselves. They passively follow the predetermined paths laid out for them by external forces, never fully realizing that they inherently possess the profound power to choose something different, something more authentic. They habitually suppress their true nature, their unique gifts, their deepest longings, never fully realizing that their greatest strength often lies precisely in courageously embracing all that they are, both light and shadow. But you, simply by engaging with these ideas, by opening yourself to this possibility, don't have to be one of those people. You possess right now the inherent power to break free from the limiting illusions that have perhaps held you back for years, to consciously shed the heavy layers of societal conditioning and paralyzing fear that have potentially kept you from experiencing life fully authentically, to courageously step into the inherent fullness of who you truly are, unafraid of your complexities and unapologetic for your unique existence. And in the next part, we are going to explore something even more profound, more foundational, the hidden archetypes residing deep within you. These ancient universal patterns buried deep within the collective psyche hold the essential key to unlocking your greatest untapped potential. What you are about to learn next may fundamentally change the way you perceive yourself forever. If the challenging yet ultimately rewarding journey towards finding your true self were as simple as merely making a conscious decision, as easy as flipping an internal switch, then likely everyone would already be living in perfect, blissful alignment with their authentic nature. But as we have begun to see, the actual process is far more complex, far more nuanced, involving not just conscious intention, but also a deep, courageous dive into the often unconscious forces shaping our lives. It is not just about consciously choosing who we ideally want to be. It is perhaps even more fundamentally about uncovering the powerful, often invisible forces that have already shaped us, facing the parts of ourselves we have systematically rejected, and patiently, consciously integrating them into a more cohesive, authentic identity. But here arises a crucial question: why do we often feel inexplicably drawn towards certain specific behaviors, desires, or even fears that seem almost irrational? Why do we find ourselves frustratingly repeating the same mistakes or falling into the same detrimental patterns in relationships or life choices, even when we consciously try desperately to change? Carl Jung's answer to these perplexing questions was truly revolutionary. He believed that residing deep within every human being, beneath the surface layers of personal experience and conditioning, exist universal inherited psychological patterns, deep-rooted psychological blueprints that profoundly influence our thoughts, shape our emotions, and predispose us towards certain behaviors in ways we often do not fully understand consciously. He called these fundamental universal patterns archetypes. Jung argued forcefully that archetypes represent ancient collective images, primordial psychic structures stored within what he termed the collective unconscious, a deeper level of the psyche shared by all human beings, transcending individual experience, containing the accumulated psychological wisdom and predispositions inherited from the countless experiences of our human ancestors. These powerful, often unconscious archetypes subtly yet significantly shape our personal identity, influence our relationships, and even color the very way we perceive and interact with the world around us. Think about the timeless stories that have been told and retold throughout human history across diverse cultures, the archetypal hero's journey, embarking on a quest against overwhelming odds, the recurring figure of the wise mentor offering guidance and insight, the menacing presence of the shadowy villain representing repressed darkness or external obstacles, the vulnerability and potential of the innocent child. These enduring characters, these resonant narratives appear ubiquitously in ancient myths, sacred religions, classic literature, modern movies, and perhaps most intimately within the symbolic language of our own personal dreams. They persist, Jung argued, precisely because they are not just fictional creations. They represent fundamental psychological forces, inherent potentials that exist deep within all of us. And whether we consciously realize it or not, these powerful archetypes are constantly at play within the unfolding drama of our own lives. For example, consider the universally resonant hero archetype. This represents that innate part of you, however dormant or developed, that inherently longs for purpose, that feels intrinsically called towards something greater than mere survival or comfort. It embodies the fundamental human drive to overcome obstacles, grow stronger through adversity, and ultimately achieve a higher, more integrated version of yourself. But crucially, this hero archetype does not exist in isolation. Within the complex ecosystem of the psyche, it is always inevitably accompanied by its counterpart, its necessary shadow, the shadow archetype. The shadow, as we previously discussed, represents all those repressed, hidden, often denied aspects of the self. It is the repository of your deepest fears, your perceived weaknesses, your unresolved traumas, and paradoxically, often even your greatest untapped potential that you perhaps fear owning. In countless myths and legends, the aspiring hero must first directly confront their personal shadow, often symbolized externally as a literal monster, a formidable enemy, or a great internal challenge, before they can truly evolve, claim their power, and fulfill their destiny. Now let's consciously bring this archetypal dynamic into the context of real life. Have you ever experienced a pivotal moment when you knew deep down that you needed to change something significant in your life, yet felt an almost overwhelming internal resistance holding you back? A time when a clear opportunity presented itself for you to step into a greater version of yourself. Perhaps pursue a long-held dream or embrace a healthier relationship, but paralyzing fear, crippling self-doubt, or an inexplicable pattern of self-sabotage ultimately held you back. This internal conflict, this psychological tug-of-war, often represents the archetypal battle between the aspiring hero within you and the limiting forces of the unintegrated shadow playing out internally. The fundamental mistake most people make, Jung suggested, is instinctively trying to suppress or eliminate the shadow, viewing it merely as an enemy to be vanquished. But Jung believed conversely that true psychological transformation happens precisely when we consciously choose to integrate the shadow, not by blindly acting out its impulses, but by courageously understanding its underlying messages and learning from its often difficult wisdom. Let's say, for instance, you consistently struggle with pervasive self-doubt. Instead of habitually ignoring it, criticizing yourself for it, or pretending it doesn't exist, Jung would likely encourage you to consciously ask probing questions. Where specifically does this persistent self-doubt truly originate? Is it genuinely yours based on objective reality, or was it perhaps subtly planted in you by critical past experiences, limiting societal expectations, or the internalized negative voices of others? What potential lessons does this feeling of doubt hold for me? Could it be perhaps that hidden within my perceived self-doubt, there actually exists a hidden strength, such as genuine humility, a capacity for deep introspection, or the valuable ability to see complex situations from multiple perspectives? When we begin consciously to perceive our internal struggles not merely as personal weaknesses to be ashamed of, but rather as potentially meaningful messages originating from the deeper unconscious, everything begins to change. But the archetypal landscape extends far beyond just the fundamental polarity of the hero and the shadow. There exist many other powerful archetypal forces operating within us, each playing its own unique role in shaping our identity and experience. One of the most significant pairs Jung identified is the anima and animus archetype. Jung believed that within every man, regardless of conscious identification, there exists a hidden, often unconscious feminine side, the anima, and correspondingly within every woman there exists a hidden, often unconscious masculine side, the animus. Crucially, these terms are not primarily about biological sex or conventional gender roles in the physical sense. They represent rather the necessary balance of psychological energies within every individual. The anima typically embodies qualities like intuition, emotional depth, creativity, relatedness, and a deep connection with the unconscious inner world. The animus, conversely, often represents qualities like logic, structure, discipline, assertiveness, and engagement with the external world. When these two fundamental psychic forces, the anima and animus, are relatively in balance within an individual, consciously acknowledged and integrated, That person tends to feel more psychologically whole, adaptable, capable of navigating both their inner and outer worlds effectively. But when these energies remain largely out of balance, or when one aspect is heavily suppressed or rejected, inner conflict inevitably arises, often manifesting in external life challenges. For example, a man who unconsciously rejects or fears his own anima, his feminine side, may consequently struggle profoundly with expressing genuine emotions, perhaps viewing vulnerability inherently as a weakness, potentially leading to difficulties in forming deep, intimate connections. Conversely, a woman who unconsciously rejects or undervalues her own animus, her masculine side, may find herself struggling with effectively asserting herself in the world, perhaps feeling perpetually hesitant to take control of her own life or pursue her ambitions confidently. But, and here lies the transformative potential, when these fundamental inner energies are consciously embraced, acknowledged, and integrated rather than perpetually suppressed or projected onto others, they become an immense source of inner strength, creativity, and psychological wholeness. And this leads us directly to one of the absolute most important truths Jung discovered through his lifelong exploration of the psyche. To genuinely, truly find yourself, you absolutely must embark on the courageous journey of embracing all parts of yourself: the perceived light and the acknowledged dark, the conscious masculine and the unconscious feminine, the comfortably known and the terrifyingly unknown aspects of your being. Individuation, remember, is fundamentally not about somehow becoming something entirely different, striving for an unattainable ideal of perfection. It is rather about courageously becoming psychologically whole, integrated, authentically you. But there remains one final crucial piece to this intricate psychological puzzle. One last potential revelation that promises to tie everything we have explored together, potentially shifting your perspective in the most profound way imaginable. Because arguably the greatest single obstacle preventing you from truly finding yourself is not just paralyzing fear or crippling self-doubt or pervasive external conditioning. It is something potentially far deeper, something fundamentally hidden within the very fabric of how we typically perceive reality itself. Prepare yourself to uncover it. What you are about to potentially learn may fundamentally challenge everything you thought you knew about the nature of your own self, and in doing so, it may just possibly change your life forever. Throughout this entire intricate journey, we have meticulously explored the often hidden psychological forces diligently shaping your perceived identity. The socially constructed masks, persona you habitually wear, the repressed, often feared shadow you instinctively suppress, and the powerful universal archetypes subtly influencing your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors from the depths of the collective unconscious. But now, as we approach the very culmination of this exploration, we must courageously confront the deepest illusion of all, the pervasive, often unquestioned illusion of a fixed, separate self. You see, most people navigate their entire lives operating under the fundamental, often unexamined assumption that their core identity is essentially fixed, stable, unchanging, that they possess a single, unified, unchanging self that simply moves linearly through time, accumulating memories and experiences along the way. But Carl Jung, aligning with the insights of many great philosophers and mystics throughout history, understood something far more radical, far more profound. The self, as we typically conceive of it, that limited ego-bound identity, is not a static entity at all. It is inherently fluid, perpetually ever-changing, constantly evolving, and perhaps most startlingly, it is potentially far, far greater, more expansive, more mysterious than we have ever been led to believe. What if the specific version of you that you currently identify with so strongly, your personality traits, your history, your beliefs, your limitations, represents only a tiny fragment of something infinitely larger, more encompassing? What if the person you consciously think you are is merely one single expression, one temporary manifestation of a vast underlying, perhaps even limitless consciousness. A consciousness that has been subtly evolving for centuries, perhaps even millennia, flowing across lifetimes, metaphorically or literally, depending on your belief system carrying within it the accumulated inherited wisdom and experience of countless generations. Jung explored this profound idea through his ultimate concept of the self, again often capitalized, not the small, constricted, often fearful, ego-driven self that desperately clings to labels, possessions, and fears mortality, but rather the true self, the underlying totality of who you potentially are, the organizing center of the psyche, existing beyond the limiting illusions of individual identity, connecting you perhaps to something timeless, universal, transcendent. And this realization, when truly grasped, is simultaneously profoundly liberating and potentially deeply terrifying. Liberating because it means you are not irrevocably bound by your past, your perceived limitations, or the narrow definition of self you have perhaps adopted. Terrifying because it implies that everything you have previously believed yourself to be, all the fears that defined you, all the limitations you accepted, all the stories you relentlessly told yourself about who you are, is not the full, ultimate truth. It is merely a construct, a temporary psychological framework built largely by the limited conscious mind, designed perhaps for survival within a specific context, but not representing the boundless totality of your true potential. And here arrives the potentially most powerful truth of all. You are fundamentally not just a single, isolated being, a separate ego, navigating independently through life. You are, perhaps more accurately, a localized expression of a vast interconnected field of consciousness. You carry dormant within you the collective wisdom of generations, the profound depth of the shared human unconscious, and the almost unimaginable potential for ongoing transformation that lies far beyond the grasp of your everyday imagination. But if this profound truth potentially holds true, then why do we so often feel so limited, so separate, so vulnerable? Why do we consistently experience suffering, pervasive self-doubt, paralyzing fear? The answer, Jung suggested, lies primarily in the function and limitations of the conscious ego. The ego itself is not inherently the enemy. It serves a vital, necessary psychological function. It is simply that specific part of the conscious mind that effectively creates a sense of individual separation, identity, continuity. It is that persistent voice residing in your head that constantly narrates your experience, asserting, "This is who I am," and implicitly, "This is who I am not." The ego diligently builds psychological walls, defines perceived borders between self and other, and often works tirelessly to keep you safely tethered to familiar patterns, beliefs, and identities, resisting anything perceived as threatening to its established structure. And while the ego undeniably serves a crucial developmental purpose, allowing us to function as distinct individuals in the world, it simultaneously, often inadvertently, becomes the greatest single obstacle to deeper self-discovery, to experiencing the boundless reality of the true self. Because in truth, fundamentally, you are not ultimately limited to a single fixed identity. You are inherently a dynamic being in constant evolution, capable of accessing depths and potentials far beyond the ego's comprehension. And the very moment you consciously stop clinging rigidly to the limited idea of who you think you are based solely on past conditioning and egoic identification, you paradoxically unlock infinite possibilities for growth, transformation, and authentic becoming. But how, practically speaking, does one actually do this? How do you consciously begin to step beyond the pervasive illusion of the separate, fixed self and intentionally move towards experiencing the inherent fullness of your true existence, the boundless potential of the self? Jung offered a challenging yet ultimately liberating path, one that invariably requires immense courage, dedicated, deep introspection, and a profound willingness to consciously surrender everything you previously thought you knew about yourself and reality. First, consciously embrace the unknown. Most people instinctively fear the unknown precisely because it represents uncertainty, a loss of perceived control. But paradoxically, the unknown is precisely where genuine growth happens. It is the fertile void from which authentic transformation occurs. When you consciously choose to stop resisting the inherent mysteries residing both within you and within life itself, and instead learn to lean into them, with open curiosity seeking understanding rather than demanding certainty, you inevitably begin to see the world and yourself with entirely new eyes. Second, practice releasing attachment to limiting labels. You are fundamentally not just your given name. You are not just your professional job title. You are not solely defined by your past experiences or traumas. You are certainly not merely your current personality construct. You are ultimately something infinitely far beyond any single definition or limiting label. When you consciously practice letting go of rigid self-identifications, you create invaluable psychological space for something far greater, more authentic, more aligned with your true self, to emerge from the depths. Third, diligently learn to listen to the subtle whispers of the unconscious. Pay close attention to your dreams, treating them as valuable symbolic messages. Honor your deep instincts, your gut feelings, your quiet intuitions, even when they contradict logic or external expectations. Understand that these are not random occurrences. They are often direct communications from the deeper self, gently yet persistently guiding you toward wholeness. The more consistently you learn to tune in to this inner guidance system, the more you will begin to intuitively recognize the subtle patterns, meaningful synchronicities, and guiding signs that inevitably lead you toward fulfilling your true path. And finally, perhaps most challenging yet most crucial, consciously surrender to the ongoing process, finding yourself embodying your true self. Achieving individuation. This is not a final destination with a clear endpoint. It is not something you definitively achieve once and for all, then simply forget about. It represents an ongoing journey, a perpetual unfolding into deeper and deeper layers of truth awareness and authentic being. Trust the process, even when it feels uncertain or difficult. And here lies the ultimate revelation, the profound culmination of this entire exploration. You were, in fact, never truly lost to begin with. You have always been inherently here, present within the boundless expanse of existence. The self you have perhaps been desperately seeking externally has been patiently residing within you all along, obscured only by the veils of conditioning fear and egoic identification, quietly waiting simply to be remembered, reclaimed, re-embodied. So now, finally, the ultimate choice rests entirely with you. Will you choose to continue living as merely a fragment of who you truly are, perpetually bound by old fears, limiting beliefs, and comfortable illusions? Or will you summon the profound courage to step forward decisively into the vast unknown, consciously embracing the limitless, interconnected, evolving being that you were always truly meant to become? Because authentic life does not truly begin until you finally find yourself in this deeper, more profound sense. And now, possessing these insights, you finally know the way.